all about writing with Ben and Sara.
Welcome to All About Writing, the podcast that covers everything about the world of writing from the inside out. This is episode 26, part 3 on our series on screenwriting. I'm Ben, here with my co-host Sara, who is an award-winning, best-selling author, screenwriter, editor, and TED Talk presenter.
And I'm Sara, here with my co-host Ben, who is an award-winning, best-selling author and ghostwriter, editor, and publisher. And today, on part 3 on our screenwriting series, we are going to talk about something that's very near and dear to my heart, which is how it is to adapt your books for the silver screen or for TV or for a streaming service or for any type of, visual media that you could possibly think of that you might want to see or hear your books in. And this is something that has been a big part of my publishing journey. Ben has had to come along for the ride, listening to me and agonizing with me over the pace of this, the ups and downs, the close calls and backtracking. But I know you have a lot of questions for me too, Ben, because I sit in Hollywood a lot more than you do and have had to wrestle with the adaptation process in multiple ways. So please, I will answer everything as much as possible. I'm under no gag orders as of now, so.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. I mean, as you know, I've got some experience with screenwriting, but I know enough basically to know that it's a very different medium from novel writing. And while some of the basics of story may be the same, there's an awful lot that has changed. And as a reader of books and a viewer of movies, I've certainly seen enough screen adaptations of favorite books to realize that they're never the same. They always change. And that can often be a criticism, like, oh, it's not as good as the book, or oh, they changed this. And I think that we should have figured out by now that they have to, because it's impossible to take a book exactly the way it exists and turn it into a movie or a TV show. Just the nature of the medium requires some things to change. So maybe I could just start with there, Sara, and just asking, as you take one of your books and you think about turning it into a screenplay, what has to change in the way you think about the storytelling?
Well, you have to, we talk a lot about show versus tell.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
Show versus tell in screenwriting is very different. And it, in a way, you feel like you're breaking rules when you're dealing with moving your vision to a script, because you're doing things that when you're writing a novel you would never be allowed to do. So that's big. Also, you're thinking about the budget.
Yeah.
So certain scenes that are in your book, if you know anything at all about productions, you'll go, oh my gosh, we can't do that scene, it's too expensive. Mm-hmm. Or one time I actually had a producer and I had written a script and they came to me and they're like, are you kidding me? Like, you have a scene, not only do you have 3 kids, so child actors, annoying, expensive, pains in the butts on set, but you have like a trained mountain lion. You want us to use chickens? They like, what? You can't train chickens. Like there was all of these expensive things I hadn't realized were expensive or hard to do. And they're like, so that all needs to change. So certain scenes, you're thinking about what you want to have happen, but you're thinking about it in a way to make it not expensive if you want it to happen. You're also thinking about world building in a different way because it's visual, and you're only creating that skeleton of like where this is happening, because everything else is going to be handled by the director, the production designer, the set decorator, the post-production team. So that also is going to weigh in, and it's like writing a book with a huge team of people as opposed to just yourself.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch to unpack there. And you've reminded me of a couple of things that I've even experienced in my own limited time with screenplays. Well, first of all, I write military science fiction, right? So we talk about budgets for making a movie out of that. I remember
Mm.
pitching my book once to a movie person, and she was actually kind enough to listen to the pitch. And I said to her, "Okay, so what do you think this would cost to turn into a movie?" She looked at me and said, "About 400 million." So it ain't happening. Yep. Okay. Fair point. Fair point. So if I want to actually write screenplays, I should probably think a little smaller scale, a little closer to home. Maybe not quite so many aliens. Anyway, so I mean that's a really good point. It's just the fact that there are some things that you can do for free in a book that cost an awful lot when you make a movie. So if it's a simple thing, if it's fundamental to the story, well, no, you've got to keep it. But if it's just a little throwaway thing that you put in because it was cool, it might have to get cut from a screenplay because it's too difficult, it's too expensive, too complicated to do on film. So that's a great point. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, was another thing I was thinking about too. You just said, oh, I don't know, it's gone. It's good. It's just so much to think about. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. It's okay.
But
I was going to say, though, to your point, if I can jump in, the adaptations, sometimes, even if they're expensive, even if, uh, there's special effects and it's a big cast, they can do the book almost exactly, because it's famous enough.
mm,
So, for instance, I don't know if you've read it, but Neil Gaiman's Stardust, the book,
hmm hmm
um, the film is almost exactly spot on. I don't think I think some of the words are the same, like they lifted them right out of the book. The play by play of what happens in what order. Um, I I don't think they left anything from the book out, and they didn't put really anything else in. It's almost a play
hmm
by play. That's rare
hmm
though, but it does.
Absolutely.
I shouldn't, because I don't want people to walk away going, it never happens. It can happen, but it's rare, and it's like a cult book. Like and the book itself was short enough, and scope was huge. It's this fantasy world and flying ships and everything, and they had amazing huge cast. But this so the scale was big, but the scope, like, it was such a condensed story in an epic
hmm
place. It was perfect. It was almost like Neil wrote that novel understanding how it could be made into a film and feasible to do so.
And you know
And
what? Actually, I wouldn't put it past him because he is a very,
I
very
wouldn't,
smart guy. And maybe he
yeah.
thought, you know what? I know enough about screenwriting to know that I'm gonna write this that way. Maybe compare that, if I may, to Lord of the Rings, right? J.R.R. Tolkien, who was not at
Yeah.
all thinking about turning it into a movie when he wrote his books.
No.
It's three books. Sorry, it's three movies. Um, each one is about 2.5 to 3 hours long, and they still couldn't fit everything in. But having watched the special features, like many of us have, I've learned about the insights of the writers and saying how, yeah, there were some things in the book that we love, but they really didn't advance the plot. They were just this cool side thing, like infamous absence of Tom Bombadil. And they
Right.
said it's not to say that our heroes in the movie didn't visit Tom. We just didn't show it on screen, which is a very nice way for them to say that's why we left that whole section out because the pace had to keep moving. And that's one thing I do understand about movies is pace. Like they do have to keep moving. Whereas books can be a little more leisurely if you're writing strongly enough. But movies, nope, they gotta keep moving forward. There has to be momentum.
Yes. And even when you tell yourself, "Oh, this can be adapted to a limited series or a multi-season TV series," there still needs to be almost like a driving push and every act is a mini movie in itself, and you're constantly advancing things so that, because if it does drag, people, especially in this day and age, like people don't have the patience for those slow unfolding. And in a way, you would maybe even say, well, if you want that experience, you read a book. But in any type of visual medium, it's you need that constant pressure on that pace pedal. And so
Mhm.
even in slower parts of films, um you know, there's a reason for it, and it's usually because it's creating tension, or it's creating something that you need later. There's only a handful of movies that I can think of that are relatively, I don't want to say newer, but are, kind of in the time period where you started to just see only really more highly paced films. But it, comes with a very expensive cast and a fancy director. Like, for instance, the Meet Joe Black was a very famous movie and a very long movie. And a
Mhm.
ton of that was like the characters staring at each other, which didn't advance the plot.
Yeah.
But it was almost like this voyeuristic fascination with these close up long shots. And in a way, it was a stylistic choice by a director
Mhm.
who was allowed to, at that point,
Yeah.
to do stuff like that. So
And
yeah.
I think that's a really good point that, we can look at some of the biggest movies ever made, but your point is valid, Sarah, that these are made by big directors with big stars, and they have a little bit more leeway to kind of do what the artist wants because they have so much power behind them. For any of us who are adapting our novels to screenplays, if we don't have that kind of star power, we have to be very conscious of how easy it is for someone to say no in Hollywood. They're almost looking for an excuse to say no because they got 100 more to look at. So some of the common pitfalls, and I think you've nailed a couple already. Get rid of really expensive things in your screenplay, like things that require 1,000 people, things that require 100 kids, things that require chickens. Make sure that every character matters because they have to hire an actor for every single one of those characters. So if they can reduce the size of the cast, so just like they did in Lord of the Rings, mix a couple of characters who were different people in the book into a single character in the movie to give it a bit better flow through, but also to cut down on the number of salaries they have to pay. A simplification, I guess, is really what we're looking at here. Um, but then it comes down to the question of, and here's my next big question is, how much is going to be lost when you take the depths and richness of a novel and turn it into a movie? Is it sort of an expectation that we're going to lose something in the transition?
You will lose a ton. Um, I should be honest too with saying usually, unless you're already a well known screenwriter, you will not get to adapt your own book.
Hmm.
You can
Fair.
try it. You can write a script to match it as almost like a proof of concept, but especially if it's going to be TV or a miniseries, they're going to put a tried and true showrunner in charge, and you, if you're lucky and you have the right reps who can get you at least to sit in the room with tape over your mouth, so
Hmm.
you can watch but not, but not really participate, or you get like a lowly writer position. Your script has to either be blowing people away, or getting a lot of awards, or be kind of like, a well known, your book does really well. But for you to write the script. That said, I mean, it's not unheard of, but it's harder for the actual
Hmm.
writer of the book to do it. They don't trust you to be able to like get rid of all the extra stuff and actually just give a streamlined story because they think you're going to be too invested. But um but the other thing is you're going to lose a ton. You may not even recognize a lot of your book, but you're also going to gain a completely different perspective of your novel, which is a
Hmm.
really interesting way. You're going to see your book come to life through a completely different lens, through through not only the film lens, but you're going to be like, huh, they went that direction. Like it might be, I've been in discussions so many times I've lost count with people who have optioned my books. and even seen kind of some early, first drafts of what a film could look like. I've seen actual whole drafts from writers on here's what we're going to do. And I remember going, um, what they had, what? Like the roots of the book were there. Flats Junction was there. The main characters were there. They were still kind of themselves, but it was nothing like my books.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like they took the basis and then they're like, but we're gonna make up our own castle now. And that's their prerogative as screenwriters. So you'll
Yeah.
lose a lot, but you might gain a whole different um you're gonna gain a whole different extra world, like a world on top of a world. Just
Hmm.
someone else's
Yeah.
build of what you've created.
Yeah, and it is important to recognize that this is an adaptation. It's not a literal translation of from one medium to another. This takes the essence of what your story is and it adapts it to the new media. And the new medium uh, has different requirements. It
Right.
just can't do some of the things as well, but it can do other things better. It really can. Like, no matter
Right.
how good an action scene I ever write in a book, Hollywood could do it better. I guarantee you. With the cool cuts and the special effects and the music and oh yeah, oh yeah. So, and that's the strengths and weaknesses of the different media. So that's fair. And I think if any of us were to go into the idea of adapting our books to a screenplay, first it's good to know that it probably isn't gonna be us that do it. But just in case it is, and let's say, for example, I'm an author and I'm aspiring to be a screenwriter. So to practice, I will
Oh,
write a
yeah.
screenplay of my own book.
It's a really
It may
great
never
way.
be,
Wonderful.
but I
Yeah.
know the material. I can do it well, and it's an interesting exercise to go through because I'm going to have to chop my own book up and say, yeah, can't do that either. Going to have to change that. If I can think about how a studio would actually approach this, the number of people they need, the number of sets that they need, the number of visual effects shots that they need. How can I whittle it down to its fundamentals and still be my story, but be something that could actually be produced? So interesting challenge for sure.
It is, but you made a perfect point. Even if you recognize that the chances of your version of your book, your adaptation, as you make it into a film, will probably never get optioned simply because of the gatekeeping in Hollywood and those kinds of things. Um, it is great practice, and if you are an aspiring screenwriter, showing that kind of work and having one more piece of screenwriting work in your in your folder to say, look at
Yeah.
what I've at least done, like spec work. That's
Hmm.
great. It's like it's a lot of good reasons to adapt your own work, not least because of practice, but because it adds to your portfolio. That was the word I was looking for,
Hmm.
of work. And um and so I think I definitely encourage people to do it. I mean, you can even just as a spec project, if you have a favorite book, like you love Jane Eyre, it's my favorite book, right? And it's been done in film like I think 3 or 4 times now. And they never change any of it. They just do it again. um but like that I could practice, right? Like I could write my version of Jane Eyre knowing the story inside and out, and that could be a spec script that's sitting in my portfolio that I could show somebody. Yeah, like I've adapted like this classic piece of Gothic literature. Um, and they'd be like, great, like we've seen that you can do this. Like this is kind of like proof of your ability. Um, especially like, well, Jane Eyre's a bad example because I think it's public domain. So like you could sell that script. But if it was like a very recent book where you definitely don't have the rights, like you're never gonna sell that script. But it does show that you have some chops. So if you have a favorite
Hmm.
novel, just for practice sake, you can adapt it and put it in your portfolio as a spec script.
Hmm.
So um, that's just piggybacking off of your adapt your own stuff. You can adapt other people's stuff too, for fun and for
Yep,
practice.
for practice. Yep, yep. And I think that um, it's important just to really emphasize again how different the two media are, and whenever scripts are produced and it's quote nothing like the book, there are reasons why that was made. Yeah, it could be that there were creative decisions that the director or the writer wanted to go in, but more likely it is just because of the realities of what they can produce on film. And, I look again to Lord of the Rings. It's very clear that the writers of those movies loved the books, loved them, respected them, wanted to do justice to them, but they had to make changes. Harry Potter is another one. And if anyone out there is a big Harry Potter fan, I encourage you, if you're interested in screenwriting, look at the book and then look at the movie. And you'll always be able to say, oh, well, they dropped this, they dropped that, they didn't develop this, they didn't develop that. True, but there wasn't room. So what did they do? What did they keep? And is that the essence of the book? And I'd encourage you, if you really are a fan, I'll use Harry Potter because almost everybody's a fan, really break it down. Look at the first book and the first movie because they're the shortest, so it's the easiest. And look at what did they cut, and ask yourself why. Why did they cut that? It's not because they didn't like it. It's not because they didn't think it was cool. It's some reason. Pacing, budget, just it was a bit of a red herring. Who knows why? But have a look, and that can help you to understand a little bit more about how screenplays come together. Because these are the experts putting it together, and how did they take a book that was written by an expert and make it so that it is still recognizable and is still loyal, but at the same time is a very different story all on its own.
Exactly. And I think that adaptions are usually a product of someone has a vision for how they and they have the money and they've got the connections, or the book is so big not to do something visual would be a travesty, right? um but you have to go in knowing, especially if it's your work that's getting adapted, that once you sign away the rights for someone to adapt your work, that you, unless you're really lucky, you are not going to potentially recognize what they put out there. And that is the kind of the the bargain you make. It's not a
Yeah.
deal with the devil per se, but it is, you have to let go of all of the creative um, say that you have with the world that you wrote. And
Hmm.
if anything comes out of, I mean, I have come to that point and I don't care. I'm like, I don't care what you do, just film it finally. It's been years of discussions with multiple production companies, ups and downs and meetings. And I mean, oh, we're close. No, we're not. No, this is like, just even I mean, and I know it's not unique. I think I heard like it took 20 years for Outlander to finally see screen time.
Wow.
And so I don't feel bad that it's been like less than 10. Like I'm like, oh well, it's fine. But it's but it's rare that you as a writer are going to get consulting, producing say.
Hmm.
And a lot of that too is because writers are notorious in Hollywood, book writers, for showing up on set and like having a conniption because this is not how the book was, or because too much has changed, or someone didn't see some detail, and they create a lot of drama on set. And that's why book writers are usually not allowed, once they sign in away their stuff, to even be like checked in with or consulted.
Yeah.
Diana, I know, is a rare case, and George R. R. Martin is too, where they get they get voices in those writing rooms. And part of that, I mean, in George's case, it's like you probably need his brain because he knows like that world like crazy. Diana, I think I remember watching something where they were saying how like they showed her things and they wouldn't know how she would react. And it's kind of a litmus test, like, hey, is the
Mm.
writer gonna like fly off the deep end and like want us to change 100 things, or are they gonna end up actually being a helpful producing partner on this? And so if you ever do get to that point, you need to decide kind of what kind of writer you're going to be, and the more collaborative you are and kind of hands off you are,
Hmm.
unless you're a big dad, big wig, like the more involved you're going to be allowed to be.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. People who tuned in for this might have thought we were just going to talk about the basics of craft of transferring a novel to script, but you cannot discuss scripts without discussing the truth of Hollywood. And as an
Yeah.
author, you can sit and write your book pretty much by yourself, but as soon as you get involved with film, there are 100 other people who have a say in this, and you are not the most important one. So it is really interesting, and it's a whole world that we will continue to explore in this series
Yeah.
on screenwriting. But for today, I think that's our show, everyone. Please don't forget to
Yes.
subscribe so you don't miss any of our chats, and feel free to leave a review. It really does help us a lot. If you're looking for any help with any aspect of your writing, we recommend our friends at Cascadia Author Services. They're great folks. They can help you out with anything from concept design through editing, through cover design, through screen adaptation. And you can find them at cascadiaauthorservices.com. And you can catch up with Sara at saradalman.com and on Instagram.
And you can find Ben at bennettrcoles.com, as well as Facebook and Instagram. Thanks again for joining us today where we talked about adapting your books to the screen. Please reach out if there are any topics that you'd like us to cover along this line or any others, and we'll see you again when we next chat all about writing.
This has been All About Writing with Ben and Sara.